All right, everybody. So we have Brad Loomis with us today from 3D Muscle Journey. He's successfully competed in bodybuilding and powerlifting, and he's doing a great job coaching people. So welcome, Brad, to the interview.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And for today's interview, I'm going to be making a donation to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And can you just briefly explain why you chose that one?
Well, over my coaching tenure, I've coached kids a lot, anywhere from like 5 and 6 year olds in soccer all the way up to teenagers in football. And, we love kids. My biggest passion in life right now is being a dad. And it's been an evolution, you know what I mean? And so we've contributed to St. Jude many, many times before. I have a family of athletes and they run marathons and things like that where, we contribute a certain amount of dollars or cents per mile that they complete to St. Jude's. So yeah, that's kind of one of our big, charities that we like to contribute to for kids because, they're kind of our future, right?
Awesome. And so, one of the reasons I want to talk to you today is I kind of feel like you're almost like the everyman's bodybuilder. And what I mean by that is, and I think you've said before too, and I want to make sure I say this in the best way because I mean it in a really good way, is I don't think you have the best genetics for bodybuilding in terms of compared to maybe a Jeff Alberts who can make 165 look like 190 or something like that. But you still look great on stage and you still competed successfully. I mean, you got a pro card, you competed in powerlifting. And so I think you're a great example to look to because unfortunately in this industry, we still have a lot of people and sometimes they're just not educated on the matter and they'll see somebody who's not, huge and they'll think, well, what could they know? And, I think you're a great example of you definitely know what you're talking about. You're surrounded by very knowledgeable coaches. I mean, pretty much the top coaches in natural bodybuilding. And you've been doing this for 25 years or so, right?
Almost, about 22, yeah.
20, okay. And so you've had everything, given as far as, coaching and the effort and all of that. And so I think people can look to you and say, you know what, even if you don't have amazing genetics, you can still accomplish these great things and still look really good. And maybe you won't be the best of the best, but, a very small percentage can really be the best of the best. That's just what we see on Instagram and things like that. So like I said, I think you're a great example to look to for, what people can achieve if they're consistent with it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. That's a big compliment. And yeah, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. I'm definitely the most average of all of us probably here at 3D Muscle Journey, But yeah, I think the big thing is that I never really focused on the, the goal or the prize or the pro card or the medals per se, I mean, sure, that's always kind of something that gets us started in a way, kind of focusing on that physique that we want or getting whatever prize or whatever it is that we're after. But eventually it kind of comes down to just falling in love with the process, and like Eric, I think talked about in one of his videos where, they took kids that love drawing pictures and they started giving them a prize and they no longer like drawing pictures anymore. It's like, well, if I have to do it, for a prize, I don't want to do it,
Right.
And so that's kind of my big thing is fall in love with the process, fall in love with your journey. And then like we were talking about kind of, before we started the recording, it's kind of what you learn and what you can pass on to others as you're going through that process.
Right.
And it's a pretty gratifying thing when you can not only benefit from it, but then you can take what you've learned and pass it on to others. It's kind of like a double gratification in a way.
And so when did you find that you were really good at coaching people to find that passion or to find their kind of way in this sport?
Well, early on, before I even really considered coaching or any, bodybuilding aspirations, really, to be honest with you, I worked in X-ray and I was the manager of an X-ray department. We were stationed right next to the laboratory. And I was just starting to get into health and fitness and training and working out and things like that. And I was, like a lot of people out there reading everything online. And so I was talking to, I think it was either a coworker or a patient or something, just about getting going in fitness. And I was, doing my thing. And one of the coworkers in the laboratory after we were all done, she goes, you know what, Brad? She goes, you've missed your niche here. She goes, your niche is not, taking x-rays. It's more so helping others and coaching them because you you have a way of doing it. And that really kind of struck a chord with me, and it kind of sparked a fire that, kind of turned into this huge forest fire, right?
Yeah.
And after that I was like, you know what? I think she's right. I think I need to shift gears. And that's when I started looking at opening my own gym and opening my own business and, just doing what I could to help others. And that was way back in, like, I want to say 1998, 1999,
Wow.
something like that. And it just evolved into, kind of what it is today. And obviously through that evolution, I've gotten better, and then obviously techniques have gotten better, and, we know more about it. But yeah, I want to say that it was probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years after that, when I was coaching kids and we were in football. One of the kids' parents, they said, you know what, you're the reason that we're here, because you have such an effect on those kids, and you motivate them, in such a manner that we feel like we can't, miss out on this opportunity. And then I was like, you know what? This is my God-given gift.
That's awesome.
And I'm going to take it as far as I can,
Awesome. And you didn't end up meeting the other 3MJ guys until you started competing, right? I think you started competing in 2003.
Correct. Actually, I started competing in 2003, and it wasn't until 2009 that we actually all met.
Okay.
And it was True Bodybuilding that we had met. I had met Jeff at a show in 2006. We got along really good. Just kind of fell out of contact more than anything. And then we're kind of reunited in 2009 when Alberto and I had been competing the year prior to that. And then in 2009 is kind of when we all kind of started getting together and started forming what would be the infancy of 3D Muscle Journey.
Yeah, I think I first heard about you guys from a friend in 2011 or so. I think that's like right when you guys would start kind of getting big and getting the YouTube videos out and stuff like that. And I think you went pro in 2008, and then you started powerlifting a couple of years later. Why did you end up switching?
Well, I found out really early on in my pro career about my limitations genetically.
Yeah.
Not having that really nice V-taper. And it was a bit of a disappointment on my behalf. When you go through the amateur ranks, and you have a gift of one of the big threes in bodybuilding, that being conditioning. That was kind of my gift. I wasn't, though, it was hardly ever the biggest guy up there, and was certainly never the most symmetrical, but I was always the most conditioned, the most peeled, the most lean. And so with that one real big positive attribute, I could just show up to any show at any time and contend for the win as long as I was in shape.
Were you naturally very lean? Was it easy for you to get that lean?
No, I wouldn't say naturally lean. I'm definitely not as lean as Alberto, but I can sure get there, and once I'm there, while symmetrically I may not look the best, it's just the folks called me skinless. When you see that skinless, look, your eyes just get big and you can't help, but not recognize it. But then when you go through the amateur ranks and you go to the pros, when everybody's that peeled, and everybody's got that conditioning, and plus on top of it, they've got the size and the symmetry. When you're a competitive person, you can't help but start to want to shy away from that.
Yeah.
And so then at that time, I had met Eric, and the very first time I had ever met Eric was at one of his powerlifting meets. And it was a fun environment, and it was something where I was like, I could actually kind of be in control of my placing and not just get up there shredded on the bodybuilding stage and hope for the best. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then after I saw that and met the guys, my wife was like, I think I want to do that. So I coached her to her first powerlifting competition in 2009. And then that kind of sparked a new interest in what would end up being kind of a new sport that I was going to compete in.
Awesome. Yeah. And I definitely relate there, because I too, I had pretty good strength, like in college and everything. And then, but size wise, I would say like my, 180 or my 190 didn't look as good as another person's 180 or 190, even at similar body fats. And, I have good genetics for sports. You know, I have long limbs and everything, but that makes it harder in the bodybuilding sense to fill out. And so, you know, me with 17-inch arms, let's say, it doesn't actually look that big, you know, and so if I'm competing against a guy 6 inches shorter than me and, you know, with great symmetry, it's going to be tough. And I think powerlifting, and something I was going to bring up is that I think powerlifting is a great route for people who maybe don't have the best genetics for bodybuilding because, you know, so much of, I mean, muscle hypertrophy is one aspect and it's so genetically determined. And of course, it's not just genetics, but there's a huge component there. Whereas strength, obviously there's that genetic component to do with muscle mass, but there's also the neurological factors and technique. There's more you can work on. And so I think it gives people who are a little neurotic like us and like competitive, they can work on those little edges there and, you know, to get a competitive advantage. And so I think it is a good route for people who maybe don't have the best genetics from a bodybuilding standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. Because, I mean, let's face it, if you're an athlete in any sport, you're going to have weight training as at least a component to make yourself a better athlete in that sport, right? Well, what if you don't have a sport? You know, what if you don't have a sport? You just like weight training, and weight training is your sport, right? Mm-hmm. Well, there's not a whole lot out there. You've got bodybuilding, you've got powerlifting, you know, maybe weightlifting when you're talking about the Olympic lifts, you know. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's kind of a natural, you know, almost if weightlifting is your sport, it's kind of a natural, where do you do best? You know, especially if you're a competitive guy like I am. You know, there's these two sports where weightlifting is kind of my sport. I'm naturally going to go to the one, you know, of others, I guess you might say. Now CrossFit's obviously very, very popular as well, and that could be an avenue for a weightlifter where weightlifting is their sport. But yeah, it's kind of a nice, you have a choice now. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's not like you have to just keep hammering away at bodybuilding. And then, you know, we're all faced with that temptation of taking that, we'll just call it a magic supplement, you know, that is just going to make you huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't deny that. That's something that is very tempting, I think, for anybody that is a weightlifter, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the unfortunate thing with powerlifting is it does seem to bang you up a lot more easily. And I think it was Eric Helms who said, when you decide to do powerlifting, you're kind of deciding to just slowly, you know, wear down your body, and you're just trying to prevent it from going too fast. And unfortunately, that does seem to be the case. I mean, there seems to be a lot more longevity in bodybuilding than powerlifting, and I love like the powerlifting aspect. I love getting stronger, but certainly, you know, a day of heavy squats and heavy deadlifts compared to getting the same volume through, you know, less taxing exercises, it seems to wear you down. So how long are you still competing in powerlifting? I don't know when your last meet was.
My last meet was just this last July.
Okay.
And I did pretty good. That was my full intention with that was not to focus on that meet, but more importantly to qualify for Raw Nationals.
Okay.
Which is coming up next month. Now, unfortunately, I've been kind of fighting an injury that I think is related to my scoliosis. And that just kind of came to a head, and it kind of put a stop in my powerlifting training, I guess you might say, or at least getting ready for that particular powerlifting meet, the Raw Nationals. So yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that I can get back to it. Right now, I'm kind of in a transitional phase, I guess you might say, where you know, I'm still training very religiously. I'm still dabbling in the powerlifting lifts, but just not as intensely. And by intensity, I mean it's not as heavy a load like you were talking about. It's through lighter loads, other exercises, getting more volume in. So yeah, that's my hope is to get back there again, and I think I will get back there again. But you're right, it is a sport where, especially if you're not, I guess if you're not utilizing the current evidence that we have on staying healthy and getting, you know, the most from your training and not breaking, things like periodization, you know, and things like, you know, frequent deloads and things like that. I think it's better, but I think that you're right. I think it's definitely a sport where it's like, where are you going to last longer? You're going to last longer in football, or you're going to last longer in basketball. It's just the nature of football. It's a much more physical sport. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a similar analogy to bodybuilding and powerlifting.
Yeah. Do you have goals for your next meet for each lift?
You know, it's kind of more so a total, you know, or what we call in powerlifting a Wilks.
Hmm.
I think my big goal is to qualify what they call elite, right? Quote
Okay.
unquote elite. And that's usually either a Wilks score or a payload. But yeah, it's usually a certain total at a certain body weight is
Right.
what they're after. I'm closest as a 165-pound lifter,
Okay.
but still not quite there. And that's kind of more my goal than like the individual lifts, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, ultimately, I did qualify for an international competition in 2015. Just could not get there because it was out of the country, and I'm not exactly, I don't have a lot of scratch, I guess you might say.
Okay.
So I didn't have the funds to get there, but I think that's kind of one of my big goals too, is to qualify again for, some sort of an international competition, whether it's the Pan Am Games or maybe ultimately Worlds.
Awesome, man. And just for reference, how old are you now? Because I mean, if you're avoiding injuries and everything, I'm sure age comes into play at some
And to
point.
play, yeah, I'm going to be 47 next month.
47. Okay, awesome. You're doing pretty well then for 47
Hmm.
and 22
Yeah,
years into this.
for
So
47 and a crooked back on top of it.
yeah, really. So what do you do for your? I mean, obviously, if somebody's just into bodybuilding, we can kind of switch exercises. But for powerlifters who you find keep getting hurt, on the big three that they kind of have to do,
Mhm.
what adjustments to training do you do in those cases?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's obviously very individual, and it varies from person to person. So I think obviously the biggest example that I'll give will be me. Okay,
Okay.
because you have to, when you're competing in powerlifting, you have to do the three main lifts, and you have to be well practiced at it because
Sure.
obviously, a person that is very strong, if they're not good at squatting, they're not going to have a very good squat, or at least not to their potential, right? People all the time will tell me, Brad, why is it you're so strong at squatting, benching, and deadlifting, yet your overhead press and your rows and your pull downs suck?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's because I'm not really all that strong. I'm just really good at it.
Yeah. Right.
I'm really good at squatting, benching, and deadlifting. So obviously that's a big component of it. You have to
Hmm.
do those three lifts, right? But yeah, when you talk about there is some an injury that's limiting one of those lifts, basically what we have to do is we have to find, okay, what is the minimum amount of work in that lift that we can get by with without exacerbating the injury. So me, myself, I was talking about this little injury I've been kind of battling. It's a bit of a rib injury.
Okay.
And so what we had to do is we had to just keep enough volume on deadlifting with the competition lift that I can do in order to keep proficient in that lift. And then the other volume we would just basically, make up in other lifts that I could do that didn't exacerbate that injury, right? And it worked pretty good for a matter of probably 18 months, maybe 2.5 years.
Okay.
The maximal one repetition max kept going up, because
Okay.
basically I would only test it once every 6-8 months, something like that at a competition. And so that kept going up until basically, a certain point. And then it kind of started to fall off because, you can't just get away with lifting, in your competition lifts once every 15 days
Sure.
and expect to be able to progress in that lift, right? There's going to be a point where it falls off. So that's what we kind of found worked for me. And it's kind of I guess you might say a golden rule as to how I'll go about it with coaching power lifters in the future. How much can we progress with as little as work as possible until we basically can't?
And
That's
so you're
fine.
basically filling that extra volume with like accessory exercises, related exercises that don't hurt.
Exactly, or at least as close to it as you possibly can. So like for me, while I couldn't do my competition lift, I could do a snatch grip deadlift. So we replaced the volume with as similar as exercise as we possibly could.
Gotcha.
And I think that would be my rule for how I would go about coaching that in the future.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I mean, like you said, it's tough because obviously you need to be doing it. And I
Hmm.
know for me, it was deadlifts. That was by far my favorite exercise because like I said, I had the long limbs, so I was pretty good at it. But every time I get up to a certain weight, like even like if it wasn't near failure, like mid 400s, let's say, I would get a pull on my pec and my lat. And, I never thought of it like tearing a pec on a deadlift. It sounds ridiculous, but I mean, it would really just like bunch up. And to be honest, I never really found a great way to work around it. I found, like you said, I could do accessory exercises maybe do it every couple of weeks, but anytime I go too frequent on it, it would just come back. So it is tough when you have to do a specific exercise like that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And like we were saying before, it's so individual. Like with me, there's a lot of crossover between my squat and my deadlift because I do tend to have a kind of a good morning looking type of a squat, right? So it kind of looks like my deadlift in a way. Whereas, somebody else that maybe does squat high bar and they don't have a lot of crossover there, you're going to have to be really creative as far as having a carryover of that volume. Because with me, a lot of the volume from my squatting could carry over to my deadlift since they looked, very similar. Somebody else, you're probably going to have to just, like I said, get more creative.
Sure. And I heard you mention in the past about you like to preemptively place deloads in your trainees. And a lot of people, they will kind of wait until they're starting to feel run down, or if they're still progressing well, they'll just keep going. So why is it that you do it preemptively, and how do you decide if you want to do it every 3 weeks or 6 weeks, if it's going to be before they're really getting symptoms anyway?
Mm-hmm. The big thing is you just want to be proactive. You don't want to wait until you feel like you need to deload, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, first of all, you have to kind of look at what is it that deloads do? What's the purpose of deloads, right? People don't realize that training generates a certain amount of fatigue, right? And it's not the kind of fatigue that we feel that's inherent in all training, where you're out of breath, your muscles are sore, they're tired, that inherent type of process. It's more the fatigue that kind of follows you around like a shadow that you don't even know is back there, right? And that fatigue that it keeps mounting with each week that you're training is going to limit your potential and, more importantly, your performance, right? So to make an analogy, I always say, okay, let's look at a sprinter. A sprinter knows that he can run a 40-yard dash, maybe in 4.5 seconds, right? But there comes a certain point in time when the fatigue mounts so much it's like taking a shoe off, right? Mm-hmm. He's taking his shoe off because fatigue is so high. He's like, gosh darn it, I know I can run a 4.5 second 40-yard dash, but for whatever reason right now, it's just not happening, right? Mm-hmm. That fatigue is now masking his performance. And when you're a weightlifter and your performance is basically your sport and your training, you can't possibly keep wanting and progressing from training that is from subpar performance, right? So deloads basically are the effect of putting that shoe back on. Now you can actually perform to what it is you can do. I mean, you probably felt it. I know I can deadlift 450, 500 pounds, but on this particular day, I can't do it. And so if your potential is 400 pounds and your fatigue is 500, you're in a deficit. You're in 100
sure.
underneath zero, right? However, if you know you can deadlift 400 and your fatigue is zero, what's your potential? What's your expressible strength and performance? It's 400, right?
Sure.
So you want to stay proactive and keep that fatigue manageable and low so that you can actually perform to what it is that you know that you can do, right?
Yep.
So go ahead, were you going to ask a question?
Well, I was going to say, and I think, and correct me if you have a different opinion, but I think it seems to be more important in powerlifting, or at least with those heavy lifts, because at least for me, anytime I would hit a deadlift PR, every time, the next time I would deadlift, I'd be weaker. It would just be like, I'd get up there, exactly. And especially if I was trying to show off to friends in college or something like that, I would literally do, a 6-rep max, and the next time I go in, and I'd fail with that same weight. It was just amazing to me how consistently that happened.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, performance sports, deloads are more important really than bodybuilding, right? Mm. However, it does play an important component into bodybuilding because how many times have you in your training just all of a sudden you were feeling good or whatever reason it happens to be, but you just happen to double up your volume, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it is submaximal loads, maybe it always is lighter loads, but you start chasing the pump for a while, right? Mm-hmm. You can kind of see it almost in a way. It's like you do that consistently for maybe a 2, 3, 4 week period or a whole block. You just look a little bit bigger,
Yeah.
And then there's always that point of diminishing returns when you kind of reach that ceiling and it quits happening, right? Deloads kind of keep that effect kind of propagating in bodybuilding. You drop that volume off. Then when you start picking it back up again, your body kind of recognizes it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of start getting the benefits from it again, and you just keep recycling that, kind of over and over and over again. So it does have its place. Now it's less recognizable from a performance standpoint, but you almost can't deny it when you see it from a visual kind of physique standpoint.
Yeah.
And then that kind of brings to the next question: how often? How often should you deload? Well, the big important part is be proactive, right? Make sure that you're not at a point to where you can't perform, where you can't get that weight off the floor that you can do for 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to deload before you get to that point. But you always kind of want to think of it almost in terms of time in a way, right? If you've trained for, intensely and hard with a lot of volume for a point of, say, 8 or 10 weeks, 1 week of deload is going to be a speed bump, right? It's not going to be a long enough period of time in comparison to the amount of time that you spent building all that fatigue, right? And so there's got to be kind of this ratio of, I always like to kind of use like 3 or 4 to 1, to where it's like, okay, if you do 3 weeks of training, 4 weeks of training, you need to do 1 week of deload, right? You do 8 weeks, you need 2 weeks of deload. You do 12, you need 3 weeks of deload. So your body can actually recognize, okay, you know what? This is a drop in volume, okay? I can now start dropping this fatigue that's been generating for so long. So hopefully that kind of answers that question as well.
Yeah, for sure. And when you're deloading, are you just kind of doing a standard? Well, I mean, I see actually 2 ways often prescribed. One is we cut the volume drastically. We keep the intensity pretty much the same. The other way, we keep volume reasonable, but we cut intensity to 50, 60%. Do you have a preferred method there?
Yeah. The former of the 2 that you mentioned is pretty much my favorite for most folks, right?
Okay.
I like to just say, okay, let's use the same loads and just cut the sets or / reps in half. Okay. Now, people that are kind of more novice or even, maybe not newbies, but beginners, I'll say, you know what, if we're cutting the volume in half, I don't care what you do with the weight. Shoot, take it up if you want to. But if we're going from 3 sets of 5 to 1 set of 5, or if we're going from 3 sets of 8 to 3 sets of 4, heck, take the load up. I don't care,
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the flip side, when you're looking at somebody that's more intermediate or advanced, and they are a powerlifter and they're training with very heavy loads that are pretty close, to maybe their 1 rep max, those folks can't do that. Those folks need a deload from intensity as much as they need a deload from volume. So a lot of times with those athletes, you need to do both. You need to not only drop off volume through a reduction in sets or reps or whatever, but then you also need to have a reduction in load as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it probably also depends, obviously, on the person to some degree. I know for me, if I'm training somebody and they need a deload due to something aching or an injury of some sort, I'm almost always going to be reducing the load because in that case, I want them to recover. If somebody's telling me they got a nagging elbow issue or shoulder issue, I'm not going to have them lift the same weights that they were doing before most of the time, some exceptions, I guess. So.
Yeah. And a lot of times those deloads can be extended. You can run a transitional block of, blood flow restriction for like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes, like I've even just deloaded 1 lift or 1 body part and then kind of used the extra time or the extra energy or, whatever the extra resources are to progress in another body part, So, there's a lot of different ways to deload. As long as volume comes down and you're proactive about it, that's the basic tenets of deloads and that you'll benefit from it.
And do you find any value in prior to the deload almost doing a planned overreaching from a bodybuilding standpoint?
You can, for sure. Again, just be proactive, and if you do have an overreaching phase, how many of us, are saying, oh, wow, this is working really good. I want to stretch this out as long as possible until basically you're in a hole that you can't get out of, right? So yeah, I think if you are going to do an overreaching phase to where you're just pushing volume, maybe you're pushing volume and intensity up at the same time, right? Stick to your plan. Stick to your plan and regardless of how you're feeling, make sure that you get that deload. And then again, look at the time period. Is 1 week going to be enough? If your overreaching phase was 6 weeks, you might want to stretch that deload out to where it's more like 10 days or 2 weeks so that you can actually let that fatigue dissipate. Because I don't know about you, but I've done this to myself to where it's 2.5 weeks and I still can't lift that load that I know that I can lift. And it's just because the fatigue was so high. Yeah, you're going to take a good amount of time to actually get back out of that hole again.
Sure, sure. And coming from your background in bodybuilding and powerlifting, what do you see as the biggest difference in mental hurdles competing, like going for a meet or going for a bodybuilding show? Because they're obviously, two very different endeavors once you get to the competition.
Yeah, no doubt bodybuilding. I can almost speak for probably all of the team at 3DMJ that bodybuilding is much more, it's just, I think the bottom line is really, to be honest with you, it's the least healthy.
Yeah.
People, we say that bodybuilding is an extreme sport, and people always question that. They're like, what do you mean? It's not like, jumping a motorcycle 30 feet in the air,
Right.
It's not like these typical extreme sports that you think about your body being in danger, right? Where you're up there in the air. But really it's you're doing the same thing. You're putting your body in danger, and not only obviously very essential levels of body fat, but you're messing with your hormones, you're messing with your satiety, you're messing with, your women, you're messing with, hormonal cycles and menstrual cycles, and men, you're messing with your testosterone. It's an extreme sport. It's in a much different way. And just like you're meaning to hurl yourself on that snowboard 30 feet in the air, we're purposely starving ourselves and purposely messing with, stuff that our bodies really don't like,
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, just the dieting aspect of it, the mental aspect of it that goes along with dieting and seeing your strength go down, it's by far, in my opinion, the most, I've had Navy SEALs that say that Navy SEAL training was less taxing than getting to shredded levels of body fat.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing, actually, from a few different people. Mm-hmm. So for those who, obviously, got somebody like Alberto who just seems to naturally sit around close to 8%. And for him, he's almost always a couple weeks out from competition. Obviously, some people do have a naturally higher body fat set point. And obviously, we all know everybody can lose body fat. But for some people, it seems that once you start getting what I call beach lean, any leaner than that, muscle just starts falling off, strength starts falling off. Do you have any particular strategies for those people?
Yeah. And I would say that that's probably the majority of people, right? Probably 75% are those people and 25% are Albertos, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, number one is time. We talk about this all the time at 3MJ, giving yourself enough time, because almost anybody can get that lean. Okay. It's easier for some than others, and for those type of folks, you just gotta, just like we periodize training, you gotta give yourself enough time to periodize nutrition as well. Because to keep your strength and to keep your muscle, when your body wants to burn that first before anything else, it takes a certain amount of coaxing, to letting your body know that everything's okay here. Obviously it's not, but we go through periods where we bring calories up on purpose for the period of 2 days, 3 days, a week. I've gone with some athletes 2 weeks. We don't obviously go into this huge surplus, but maybe we just go to maintenance. Maybe we go to 800 calories a week of surplus for a few weeks. Then take advantage of really good training environment during that period of time. Then boom, start diving, back under. Because it's all just a matter of making sure that your body has a reason to A, release body fat, and B, keep muscle. And the people that can manage that the best are usually the people that look the best on stage, all things considered and equal.
Sure. Do you find you have people, obviously if you're actually competing, you're going to need to get as lean as possible. But how many people do you find truly just look better not going for, the Instagram shredded look, but just, like I said, I call it beach lean, probably like a 10%, because I find a decent amount of people who, aren't enhanced with the amount of muscle mass they have, they look better at, like I said, just like a beach lean 10% body fat than they do when they're completely shredded. And, like I said, of course, when you're stepping on stage, you got to get that lean, but sometimes I think, you start to look maybe less impressive on the whole, certainly in clothes. So
yeah, and that's that's a hard thing for a bodybuilding athlete to fight, right? They want to be as shredded as possible, but at the same time, they've never been there, and they don't know what it looks like, right? And so, yeah, you're right. A lot of times, especially from a Gen Pop standpoint, people look better at beach lean than they do at shredded, Sure, maybe they don't have lines in their glutes, and veins in their traps, and things like that, but they look good. They look muscular, they look lean. They've got, abs and separation in their back and obvious deltoids that you can clearly delineate all three heads, right? But they don't have the lines in their glutes, Well, there's a certain amount of muscle that's going to be lost when you're trying to get to that type of condition where you've got lines in your glutes and veins in your traps, right?
Yeah.
And how much you can hold on to is ultimately going to dictate how lean you look and how big you look. But yeah, that's a hard thing to fight. That's a really hard thing to fight because competitive athletes that want to get to that kind of conditioning will do it at any cost. And it's kind of almost our job in a way to say to that extreme athlete, look, you're not capable of jumping those 20 cars, at least not right now.
Yeah.
Let's go for something that we can be successful, at.
Do you ever purposely not get completely shredded for even in a competition sense, just because you think they lose too much muscle?
Yeah, for sure.
Huh.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that's a difficult talk to have. And I think all of us at 3D Muscle Journey have had that talk with an athlete or two, to be honest with you.
Interesting.
And we just gotta, ultimately, they're the boss. They're the quarterback on the field. They're going to have to execute, whatever play it is that they decide. But it's at least up to us. And I think we have a certain amount of responsibility to let them know all of the possible outcomes. Look, we can get you there. It's going to take time. We can get you there. But here's the trade-off is when we get there, what are we going to be left with?
Yeah.
It's very possible that you're going to lose, a pound, 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds of muscle. There's going to be strength loss. You're going to be a much smaller version of what you are now, right?
Yeah.
Is that worth the sacrifice? Do you really, really want to go there? Do you want to go there just to see what's left and what that looks like?
Right.
And then on top of it, I purposely kind of held back on athletes that are really, really young.
Sure.
I remember way back, and I think it was 2014, I had a very genetically blessed female athlete that I knew was going to go far, and I did not want to break her in her first prep, and we purposely, I pushed her hard, but I didn't push her as hard as I knew that we needed to and that she could do because she's a worker to get to that really, really, really shredded look. I basically wanted to save that for what I knew that her potential was. And ultimately, she turned into an IFBB pro with, another coach.
Awesome.
And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that because I kind of feel partially responsible for that success, even though it didn't happen under me because I did save that person their first prep,
Awesome. Something I want to ask about was you had an experiment a while back, and I forget the exact details, but I think you either kept your weight or your calories pretty much identical for about a year. Is that right?
I did that for a really long time, from 2011 until about, maybe not 2011. It was during an extended period of time, though, from like 2012, 13, 14 until, 2015, yeah.
So years then, okay. And was that the same calories?
It was at least a good, probably year and a half, that I did this.
And so what did you learn from that?
I learned that there is such a thing as gaintaining.
Yeah.
Where, you can maintain calories, and still gain, strength. I even went through a period where the caloric deficit was very, very, very subtle. But I even went through a period to where I actually was gaining strength while in a caloric deficit. What I learned from that is number one, time, the time that it takes in order for something like this to happen, and then knowing your body and knowing basically what little you need to do to lose weight and still gain strength. It can happen. So when I say know your body, we all say that. Oh, well, I know my body and I know that I can't do squats, because it
Right.
hurts my knees and things like that. I'm kind of talking more like knowing, okay, I will stay 170 pounds taking in a mean daily average of 2,200 calories every day. I know it. And I not only know it, but I have done it.
Yeah.
I've maintained that kind of caloric mean daily average for months and months and months. And then when you do decide to go one way or the other, okay, if I know that and I've done that, well, I really only need to just kind of go down about 1,000 calories a week, right? Maybe just 2 days I go really, really low. Maybe I use some intermittent fasting. Maybe I go low carb, low fat, whatever, but ultimately just go down a couple of days really low in calories and come back up again. So that this overall deficit is really, really, really subtle. And that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say you know your body and you know your life, right? And it's consistent. Obviously, if I just all of a sudden changed my life and took on a job as a landscaper, that's all out the window.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know all that, and then you just kind of you manipulate things as little as possible, so that you can make one thing go one way and the other thing go the other way.
Awesome. Yeah. I don't know if I would ever want to do it for that long personally, but I do see the value in what you're talking about there, because sometimes, as I'm sure you experience, I feel like these changes, they take a while to notice. Sometimes we change calories and we think, oh, nothing happened. But if you were just if you just held on and waited a little bit, you'd realize it just took a week or even 2 weeks or longer to see that change. So I think, as you said, being patient and kind of waiting to see how your body reacts.
Yeah. That's always that misinterpretation of plateau. Really there is no real plateau. As long as you're in a deficit, your body's not going to plateau. You're going to keep losing weight. Now there's going to be times where it stops. And there's all these physiologic reasons as to why that happens. But if you persevere and keep going, it's going to happen. Especially if you know quantifiably, it's a mathematic certainty. I know that I'm executing and I know that I'm in this deficit. It's going to happen. But so many times, how many people lose patience? And they say, oh, well, I got to that point and then I had to quit because it wasn't working anymore. Well, it was probably still working. It just didn't happen yet. Same thing with the other direction too. Me here recently, I said that I just had to kind of change my training. And so I've been doing more bodybuilding type stuff. Nothing happened for like 3 weeks. I was training and I was, kind of playing with things, making things a little bit more heavy here, a few more reps there, but it seemed like nothing happened. And then just all of a sudden in that 5th week, the wife and the kid were out having dinner and they're like, Daddy, you look bigger. So there's my affirmation that actually it was working. It just need to give it a little bit more time.
You're right. Doesn't matter how long we've been doing this. I think it's always nice to get the little ego boosts here and there.
Oh yeah, for sure. Without some sort of a measuring stick, it makes it really hard to persevere.
Yeah. So the last question is, I'd like to go with an actionable step that people can take from the interviews. And so you've obviously had to make a lot of different choices in your path throughout the years, and one being bodybuilding versus powerlifting. And so people who are watching this, if they're kind of on the fence of which route they should take, and really try to pursue, what advice would you give for them to try to help them decide there?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, gosh. I mean, if you haven't been there and you haven't crossed that bridge yet, I think, to be honest with you, I would say do kind of what your heart tells you and what really gets you, happy and giddy to go that route, right? I think that would be my advice. Because, I think, first of all, you have to kind of outline what do the two lifestyles look like, right? You go the bodybuilding route, there is a certain amount of gratification that just kind of goes along with really sacrificing and almost putting yourself up on a pedestal, and like saying, there's very few people that can do this and I'm doing it, and then the training that goes along with that, I think it's kind of boring, but some people just love doing endless reps, sets, and chasing that pump and, getting all that swollen and everything. But then on the flip side, when you talk about powerlifting, you got to train very heavy. You don't really have to, sacrifice in the kitchen as much. But at the same time, you can't miss a training session. You can't you can't miss your volume that you've got outset there. You know what I mean? Sometimes you don't look as good, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everybody wants that shredded look and that, I think everybody calls it the 6-pack abs, you know, like on the 6-pack abs thing on YouTube and things like that. You go the powerlifting route, you know, you're going to have to get more gratification out of, you know, squatting 6 plates on a bar as opposed to having the 6-pack abs, you know? So I think that would be my advice is if you haven't really been there and you haven't crossed that bridge yet, what makes you the happiest? Which lifestyle kind of makes you the happiest and gets you just giddy, you know, to go to the gym? I think that would be my advice.
Awesome, man. All right, that's great. And so where can people find more of you? You're on 3dmusclejourney.com. Anywhere else?
Yeah, that's probably the main place you can find me is 3dmusclejourney.com. That's kind of our coaching outlet when people want to inquire about coaching and look about all of our free information, blogs, podcasts, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of where you want to go. We've got 3DMJ Vault, V-A-U-L-T, just like a bank vault, 3DMJ Vault. And there we've got more kind of like traditional education type sources. So we've got free courses, we've got paid courses, everything from, you know, posing to proper lifting technique to Q&As and, you know, all kinds of stuff on there. So you'll find me there. And then, of course, we all have the social media stuff, right? So I think my Twitter, my Instagram, and I think my YouTube is all at 3DMJ Coach. I just made it all easy that way. 3DMJ Coach. It's all the same. And then, of course, YouTube. Go to Team 3DMJ for our YouTube because we've always got good stuff there.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, definitely check those places out, guys. 3DMJ is putting out great content all the time. And thank you, Brad, for talking with us today.
No, thank you. And whatever we get for this, I want to thank you for contributing to St. Jude's Children's Network. That's a pretty awesome and unique thing that I don't think I've ever heard of before. And props to you for coming up with that.
Yeah, very happy to do it. It's been fun so far, so it's great.
Great. Thank you again.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that interview with Brad Loomis today. I really have a lot of respect for Brad, and it was great getting to talk to him. If you want to see more interviews like this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and comment down below on other topics you'd like to see covered. Also, if you believe in the charity that we're donating to today, please feel free to make your own donation.